Hello, welcome. Thank you all for being here on this important evening of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. We are very excited to be back in person. We also are welcoming some friends on Zoom tonight, and we will be recording the session if you want to go back and hear this inspiring story again later. If you are on Zoom, please remember to stay on mute, and you may participate via the chat option. For those of us that are here in person, there's an emergency exit behind you, to my right, to your left. And there's also one out front if we need it. And of course, back where you came through, restrooms are on the other side of the lobby, next to the gallery, which you'll be able to enjoy after today's program. I want to recognize our friends from the Tennessee Holocaust Commission. Quite a few of them are here today. Allison Vick, the historian, and Alyssa Trackman and Ken Byrne. I just called you. I wish. Ken Gluck. Also an honor. As well as our friends at the Jewish Congregation of Oak Ridge, here where we are. Robin and Ronnie Bogart have been amazing to work with. Larry, I did not mean to leave you out. And Larry Leibowitz, the commissioner, is also with us. And from our side on the Knoxville Jewish Alliance, I'm Anna Iroff Bailey. My coworker Tara Bain is in the back, and also our president, Brian Goldberg. So this has been a big community effort, and we are so honored and excited to share this program with you tonight. Please take a minute to turn your cell phones off and just get ready to be present in this special, solemn, inspiring moment.
It all began when Mara Kimmelman, a Holocaust survivor, planned a Holocaust Remembrance program with her Hebrew students and their families in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. Around 2011, 2012, Ronnie Bogart asked Mara to make the Remembrance program a larger community event. The response from the Oak Ridge city government, the interfaith community, and the community at large has been incredible. The proclamation from Oak Ridge is testimony to that keen level of community support. Sadly, Mira is no longer present to hear the proclamation read out loud, but the Mira Kimmelman Holocaust Study Group, the Kimmelman Contest for Students, and the new Holocaust Study elective at Oak Ridge High School are all amazing teaching efforts made in her memory. This year, Steve Reddick and Ronnie Bogart will stand in as representatives for Mayor Gooch, who unfortunately had a conflict this evening, and they will present the proclamation to you. Ronnie and Steve.
Whereas the United States Congress established the Days of Remembrance as the nation's annual commemoration of the Holocaust, which this year is observed from Sunday, April 16th to Sunday, April 23rd, 2023. And whereas 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, were murdered during the Holocaust. And whereas the history of the Holocaust offers an opportunity to reflect on the moral responsibilities of individuals, societies, and governments to ensure that lessons of tolerance, acceptance, and respect for all people are taught into perpetuity. And whereas we, the people of the city of Oak Ridge, should always remember the terrible events of the Holocaust and remain vigilant against hatred, persecution, injustice, and tyranny. And whereas it is our collective responsibility to counter the passage of time with education so that we can illuminate the factors that led so quickly from isolation and separation to extermination.
And whereas a Holocaust study is available to the community through the Oak Ridge Institute of Continued Learning as the Mira Kimmelman Holocaust Education Study Group, led by teachers Dorothy DeVan and Steve Reddick, using the memoir by Mira Kimmelman entitled Echoes of the Holocaust. And whereas the Oak Ridge schools have approved an elective course on the Holocaust for the high school based on the curriculum of Facing History and Ourselves. And whereas we therefore declare the observance of the Days of Remembrance for the Holocaust Remembrance Program, jointly sponsored by the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, the Knoxville Jewish Alliance, and the Jewish Congregation of Oak Ridge, to be held Tuesday evening, April 18th, 2023, at the Jewish Congregation of Oak Ridge, in honor of those who died and those who survived, and in appreciation to those who teach the lessons of the Holocaust. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Oak Ridge that April 18th, 2023 be proclaimed Holocaust Remembrance Day in the city of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and that all citizens be encouraged to participate in this event in remembrance of those whose lives were lost or forever affected during this time in our world's history. Signed by Warren Gooch, Mayor of Oak Ridge.
If you'd like to follow along for our candle lighting ceremony, it is in your brochure. Six million died. More than 1/3 of the Jewish population of the world. The whole world stood by silent. In 1942, the country that regarded itself as the most civilized nation in the world, Germany, the center of culture, was responsible for the death of 6 million Jews. Among them were young, innocent children, the aged, sick, defenseless, helpless people. 6 million died, and we must not forget them. Their death shall not be in vain, and this shall never happen again. In our Jewish tradition, we light a Yortzeit candle for the death of our loved ones. Tonight, let us light 6 candles, one for each million. Our first candle tonight will be lit by Thatcher and Darby Sheik. This first candle remembers the children.
Over 1.5 million children under the age of 16 died in the Holocaust, stripped of their childhoods, their potential forever left unfulfilled, in memory of helpless infants, children, and teenagers who were cut down like young trees before their time, before they had a chance to experience life.
We shall not forget. Our second candle is lit by Ken Gluck, the Tennessee Holocaust Commission education coordinator, whose father was a survivor of the Mauthausen concentration camp, to remember the parents.
In memory of the parents who perished, who tried to protect their children, who died with their children in their arms rather than be separated.
We shall not forget. Our third candle tonight will be lit by Anya Baum, who is herself a Holocaust survivor, to remember the families.
In memory of all the families who were cruelly separated from each other, relatives who died, leaving some families without any grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins, families who were completely destroyed, we shall not forget.
Our fourth candle will be lit by Julie Kinder McMillan and Steve Reddick, Holocaust educators in the Oak Ridge schools. The fourth candle remembers the teachers.
In memory of the scholars, teachers, and rabbis who were the first to be seized and murdered. The teachers who continued to teach even when it was forbidden and punishment meant death.
We shall not forget. The fifth candle will be lit by Brian Goldberg, president of the Knoxville Jewish Alliance, to remember the resistance fighters.
Jews fought bravely in resistance groups that operated under the cover of dense forest of Eastern Europe, in the ghettos and camps, in the individual acts of defiance, in memory of the heroes of the resistance who fought the Nazis, so few against so many. We shall not forget.
The sixth candle tonight will be lit by Dustin Park, who has worked and advocated to bring Holocaust education to East Tennessee through Facing History and Ourselves. The sixth candle remembers the righteous among the nations.
We honor the righteous among the nations, non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews from the Nazis, in honor of all those who stand together against hatred of all kinds.
We shall not forget. And our special candle, our seventh candle tonight, remembers Mira Kimmelman and will be lit by Ronnie Bogard, Mira's lifelong friend and mentee.
He's so mad at me. Okay. Honoring and remembering Mira for all that she did to share her personal experiences so that others would learn from the Holocaust. She impacted so many, including teachers and students. Mira says, remember, teach, explain. May her legacy and her memory be a blessing.
We shall not forget. As we take a minute to reflect on what it means to never forget, I'm going to invite a historian of the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, Allison Vick, to introduce our honored guest speaker tonight.
So I want tonight to introduce you to a gentleman who I had the honor to meet last July in Boone, North Carolina during an educator workshop about the Holocaust. During our conversation, he rang home to me how important and impactful his story was. Michael Berkowitz was born in Siberia in 1944. His parents had escaped Poland as the Nazis moved into Poland and moved into Siberia, hoping to seek refuge. When they returned home to Poland, they hoped to find their families and hoped to find survivors, only to discover that they were the only ones who had survived. But Michael is here tonight with us, and he's here to share his story, and we'd like to welcome him here tonight. Thank you for coming, Michael.
Wow. I, first of all, want to thank you for the honor that you've given me by inviting me. Should I repeat what I just said? I want to thank you for the honor, and it is truly an honor to have invited me to speak to you. I am not sure, and in fact, when I was asked to do it, the first question I posed was, who is my audience? Who am I going to speak to? That makes a big difference. Only a few weeks ago, I spoke to a middle school, and again, I forgot what it means to be an eighth grader. But it turned out that sharing of your own life experience is universal. And I hope that it works like that here too. Why do we need to, particularly with the recent political developments, not just in this country, but all over the world, why is it so important to have commemorations like this? We know that Holocaust survivors, in the traditional description of it, and that is those that experienced physically the concentration camps, the death camps, the labor camps, suffered physically, are dying. And the concern is, who will be here to, I was going to say promote, but that sounds too salesman-like, and address the issues of the Holocaust, the Shoah. So some time ago, I became aware of the fact that the Shoah is not something that you learn only by memorizing or acknowledging certain historical facts. Very important. But as has been said before, the death of 6 million is a statistic. The death of one is a tragedy. 6 million tragedies, incomprehensible. So here I am. I realized through various social, political interactions that we're still at risk, we're still in danger. So I'm here to tell you my story, not as a lecture, far from it, but as a sharing. My parents, as you've heard, were from Poland. When the Germans took over Poland in 1939, they decided, after some rather unpleasant experiences on my father's side, that they needed to leave. My father then went, and they were not married yet, not that it matters, and said, we've got to get out of here. This does not look promising, good, safe. And overnight, they decided to move to go towards the east. Again, if I intermix some factual things, forgive me, but I'm not sure that we all are familiar with every detail. So at the risk of being redundant, let me share that too. Poland, 1939, was attacked by Germany. Germany bordered it on the west coast, west side. Czechoslovakia was on the south, and that was already part of the Anschluss, inclusion into the German control. To the north was the Baltic Sea. Again, not the most friendly place to run, to escape. So going east towards Russia was essentially a no-brainer. And that's what my parents did. When they got to the border was a river. They had to cross the river to the other side. The Russians were not openly friendly, but they were accepting of those that were crossing the border. When my parents did, they were essentially given an option. Either we send you back, or since we need manpower, our men are military, if you agree to work in the coal mines of Siberia, we'll let you go there. It was really no choice. They were sent to Siberia, and I want to make sure that we understand that Siberia, to many, particularly American Jews, seemed to be a place of punishment, because it became that later. But it was just like Alaska, a state with various industries, and mining coal was one of them. Now, what I have to add is that my father, who I towered over, was a tailor, master tailor. There was no question about his skills. He taught, he was actually acknowledged by the government, Poland, as being a master and allowed to teach. But he was not a coal miner for sure. In fact, one of the repeated jokes was my mother telling everybody how he would be mining the coal, putting it on a conveyor belt, and he would, more often than not, forget his lantern on the belt, and then would turn around, and she said he would have to run, chase it to get it back. Was that an event that from the beginning made them safe, and it made them isolated? And that became very important, because most, if not all, Jews who were hiding deep in Russia and Asia were not informed, were not aware of what was happening in Europe. To them, yeah, it's a war and it will be over soon and we'll all get together again, families. My parents did relatively well. when the Russians discovered that my father was a major tailor and knew the Western styles, because as anti-West the Russians were, you know, a good suit, a good coat was important. So the coming May 1st parade, the major, practically the only holiday that was celebrated, the Workers' Day, they all ordered special articles of clothes. My father became known, and actually that was the beginning of the good life, because the only thing that they would get paid with was food stamps. See, food could not be bought no matter how much money or what form of money you had. It has to be rationed and given out in exchange for a coupon. So that's what my father would get. He had more coupons for food, and then he could negotiate that with people who needed more food, with larger families. But the war continued, and finally, when it was over, they were told, or all Jews were told, in all of Europe, not just Russia, that borders will not stop families from getting reunited. And that was an important thing. I was just born, so I can't tell you this as a personal experience, but I could tell you from the many stories and conversations that my parents had with others in a similar predicament. The train ride from Siberia to Poland took months. So they slept, they cooked, they lived, and by the time they got to Poland, and they decided to return, because my mother had 13 brothers and sisters. My father was one of 7. They said, even though the Red Cross said nobody survived, he said, we know our family. They're not going to respond to any questionnaires and acknowledge that they're Jewish, because they already discovered through experience that being Jewish is not a safe thing, and you don't need to advertise it. By the way, the same feeling I've come to see exists with American Jews as well. So knowing that they couldn't fathom, they couldn't comprehend the notion that nobody, in both families, nobody survived. So they went to the places where the families were from, only to discover the tragedy of it all. Nobody survived. By that time, I was already 3, and I became a member of the group that would later be called the second generation. We were the children of the Holocaust, true, traditionally defined Holocaust survivors, but we grew up in an atmosphere of Holocaust remembrance, stories, shared experiences, which was quite tragic, because all you heard, and all I heard growing up from neighbors, is how their families were killed, how their families were destroyed. Not a very nice topic, but a necessary topic. It was sometime later that my brother and I, we were the only family, discovered that my parents brought with them another cousin. But when they got to the border and the Russians said, coal mines, they both turned to him, said, look, you're not so healthy. Why don't you go back to our parents? And then when the war is over, because at that point they thought it was just a skirmish on a larger scale, we'll send for you. And they sent him back. Mind you, they never mentioned that to us. The guilt must have been really overwhelming. And it wasn't until decades later, in a conversation between survivors, that we discovered that to be the fact. And even after that, they didn't much talk about it. But what does it have to do with me? Well, I grew up in a Jewish community where survival, or lack of it, was the daily topic. That became very important to acknowledge, and after a while to become part of the Jewish community as it is. In other words, we could not change it. We could not create a new version of it. I grew up with stories on a daily basis. Let me add to it the fact that Jewish communities after the war, in Poland particularly, would gather in certain areas because they wanted to be with others who knew, understood, and so they created schools, cultural centers, not so much synagogues, because religion and superstition were interchangeable in the Russian lexicon. In fact, Hebrew was not allowed because Hebrew was the language of the religion. Yiddish, no problem. Why? Because it was a cultural thing. So they opened schools that were essentially not different from the Polish schools, with the exception of Yiddish and history of Jews as additional subjects. And that's where we were learning what it was to be a Jew. But we didn't have to go to school to learn that, because anti-Semitism in Poland, post-war Poland, was quite obvious and quite often violent. So there was this school, officially called the Seventh Lyceum. Off the record, it was the Shalom Aleichem School, or to all Poles, the Jewish school. And we had our own problems because it was known as the Jewish school. Polish kids would often gather at the time when we were leaving classes with rocks and sticks and chased us and try and beat us. So the entire growing up, the most important from the point of view of growth and childhood years was spent listening to stories of the Germans murdering our brethren and fighting off the kids on the street. The odd thing was, and that was again something that we learned to understand, Poland after the war was essentially acknowledging the Holocaust as a major crime but at the same time, not doing much about it. So, for example, if we called the police from the school and said, we have a bunch of hooligans there, and they're throwing rocks and we can't leave, the police would say, we'll be there soon. Hours later, nobody was there. So we had to find ways of getting out of there, climbing out the back windows, anything to get out of the surrounding of violence. So it was, on one hand, a country that acknowledged the Shoah, on the other hand, a country that did not give up on its anti-Semitism. That grew stronger and stronger because Jews believed in communism, because communism, socialism, in fact, did not allow for anti-Semitism. Workers of the world unite, they said. It doesn't matter whether a Jewish worker, Polish worker, a Chinese worker, this capitalist system takes full advantage of you. So we need to be together. So anti-Semitism was officially illegal. What that meant is that if you acted in a clearly anti-Semitic manner, I could file charges against you and you would be punished, community work, jail, whatever. But the fact was that that did not mean much. Anti-Semitism was there, ever present. I grew up with constantly being called a Jew, a dirty Jew, whatever, and with the understanding that maybe not being Jewish is a better choice. It's not easy when you are surrounded by survivors who at this point couldn't give up their identity. They saw their friends, parents, neighbors killed because they were Jewish. So giving it up and walking away from it was not that simple. The other thing that happened was the Jews, because they believed in the, at this point, Soviet or Russian system, were more likely to participate as socialists. Poles didn't like it. So they found reasons why they could be anti-Semites. Look at them. They don't believe in our country. They believe in Russia. And Russia is not our friend. Russia is our occupier. There were other, events when the Germans took over Poland. As they were moving and taking over, cities, villages, shtetls, the first thing they would go to is the Jews to let them know who the anti-communists were. And most of them were not Jewish. So the Jews became considered or victimized because they told the Russians who the anti-communists were, and therefore were held guilty of having them killed. Some of the pogroms that happened during and after the occupation were based on that very principle. They gave up our patriots. We are going to get even with them. So that was where I was growing up. The Yiddish school taught me Yiddish, so I speak that. The Yiddish school taught me facts of our past, so I'm somewhat familiar with that. When I entered the university, there were two things. As a first-year student, you were required to take a job in a field related to your field of study, chosen major. And because I wanted to study cybernetics, which in the true sense of the word is artificial intelligence, I was sent to work in a electronics factory. It was good. And then afterwards, we had one major lecture course with a few hundred students in a big hall. And the professor would have a seating map. And you had to sit in that because he would look, said, would Mr. Yakubovich please tell me, or whatever. The odd thing that happened is that that professor, who was lost without that reference to his paperwork, always remembered my name. No matter where and what I was doing, he would say, well, let's see, this is an interesting problem. Would Mr. Berkowitz please come up here and show us how to do it? More often than not, I was able to. Bragging? Yeah, I was a good student. But eventually, fellow students would say, where does he know you from? He doesn't remember anybody but your name all the time. So one day I decided to ask. During a break, I went up to him and asked. I said, look, see that you need paperwork to identify students, but when it comes to me, you appear to know me. And my colleagues have been asking, what's the story? He looked at me and said, it's not because you're Jewish. Never occurred to me. Yeah. So sometimes even the positive aspects of became symbols of deep anti-Semitism. I could tell you more stories like this that, let me tell you one more. In Polish, the way you speak automatically tells you how sophisticated you are, how educated you are. You don't have to wear your diploma by virtue of your choice of words, vocabulary, and such. They would know he is an educated person. Well, I went to a school that taught Polish well. So not often I would be not considered Jewish. In fact, with my nose, how could you? But nevertheless, I love dancing, so I joined this dance club, and we had these little sit-down dinners and things. And one woman got up and for some reason said, I'm sick and tired of the Jews. I could tell a Jew by the smell. I could tell them, they never speak Polish well. The problem was that she didn't speak Polish in a very elevated, sophisticated manner. And and I've dealt with this and that. And I got up and I said, I disagree with you. I think you've met Jews who are educated, sophisticated, knowledgeable, very Polish. And she said, no, I didn't. I said, well, you're looking at one. And at that point, I gathered my things, turned around and walked out. Later on, I was told what a great impact that statement had. So why am I mentioning it? For two reasons. One, to illustrate how many Poles, particularly not the ones that are educated, had an understanding of who Jews were and how to deal with them. But at the same time, it was a tragic element that even, and this we're talking about 1952, 53, so close to the Holocaust, so close to the ruins outside, and the story still told, it still existed. You know, the Shoah did not erase, did not eliminate the very concept, the very core of anti-Semitism. And the more Jews became successful in the party, you know, the more discriminated they became in the eyes of just Polish people, not party members, not intelligentsia, not just Polish people. We were not considered Poles. We were parasites. We were there, even though we contributed throughout history to the growth of industry, commerce. We were invited to Poland by the Polish king to help organize commerce. And in fact, Jews and Germans were both invited. We're talking about long time ago. And the understanding of how to develop industry was so limited to Poles that the Germans and the Jews were establishing ways of doing it. Well, the Germans decided after a while, you know, enough of that. Why are we helping them? We have our own place. And returned, leaving the Jews as the only ones to create a commerce-based country. Before it was a feudal thing, landowners, that's it. You owned the land by virtue of strength and you know, sometimes violent takeover. And we stayed. We stayed and create the Poland of the future. We got special privileges, but the privileges backfired. I'll give you an example. Because part of the commerce protocol was that if you were going to sell something to somebody else, you needed to prove where you got it. You know, so you couldn't sell stolen goods, except the king was so generous and appreciative of Jewish presence, and he said, Jews don't have to prove it. Well, that didn't make Polish, traders happy. And did Jews take advantage of that? Of course, human nature. That created more aggression and anger on the part of the Polish traders, who knew very well that these were stolen goods. So you see how a positive acknowledgement, appreciation, could then turn around, backfire, and become a real source of anti-Semitism. And I was living through this. So let me just tell you that there wasn't a day that I was not called a dirty Jew. Not a day. I grew up with that being my second name. Not quite, but, and we eventually decided that the anti-Semitism was growing. Post-war Poland, we're now talking about late 40s, that staying there was at best, foolish. There were, in fact, post for Poland, Germans out of the picture. There was still pogroms that in Poland, a number of them, Jews came back to claim their properties. They were met with resistance from the Poles, who took over those properties and weren't about to give them back. So they said, this is ours. So that was in the air constantly. You didn't need to be one of the traitors, but you could feel. And there's some pogroms, including one in Krakow, organized by college students, Jagiellonian University, one of the top universities in Europe, by the way, to this day. They would attack the Jewish communities, break down stores and things. And I'll share with you one interesting thing. After the pogroms were gone, everything came back to normal. It was the Polish king who decided to compensate for the losses of the Jews as a result of the pogrom. Never, ever happened anywhere. But it didn't help. It didn't help. Jews were allowed to leave. Anybody was allowed to leave to connect with the family. So under the guise of reconnecting with families, they were able to go to the West. The situation didn't change that much. I was always walking around looking over my shoulder. In fact, to this day, I have to admit I carry a knife with me. No, I carry it because just in case, I better have something. I am not going to be the weakling led to the slaughter. It's a little anecdote. I have a friend who makes belt buckle knives. They're knives that slip into your belt buckle, Velcro, and you pull it out and you have a 5-inch dagger. So I wore it every day because you never know. Here I am on the crowded subway car. People are squeezed like sardines, and there's this guy behind me sort of espousing these anti-Russian, anti-Jewish things. And he's saying that they taught him how to fight, that he is a master at killing. And so I said, whoa, this is getting a little uncomfortable. So I very gently moved my arm down my body away from his side and put it on my belt buckle. He leans into me and says, don't even think about it. You won't have time. You believe that? But that was the atmosphere that we lived. So am I not a victim of the Holocaust? Certainly more so than somebody who grew up in Tennessee. Nothing wrong with Tennessee, by the way. I came here with the concept of the streets paved with gold and no anti-Semitism, only to discover that the streets were not paved with gold. And anti-Semitism existed here too. And when I would mention it to my brethren, to college students who were Jewish, I would be told, not in America. And I said, you can't be so sure. It took decades for me to be proven right. But I am very concerned about the situation, not only in the States, global. Very hard for me to accept it as a Jew who's lived with this and also lived with the promise, the hope that eventually, once we teach, once we share, it will disappear. It didn't. In fact, I'll tell you, when I first came here, I didn't speak English. I was learning it, with some degree of intensity. And I was, how should I put it? I realized that within this society, as we are, this is 1962, anti-Semitism is all over. And they said, oh no, that's impossible. So I said, did you ever hear the expression, they Jewed me down? He said, yeah. I said, well, what do you think it means? Where does it come from? It was an effort for them to accept it. But whether it was being gypped for the gypsies or being Jewed down, we lived in an atmosphere that is not pure, that is not safe. That's why events like this are important. They're important because they engage us in a, if nothing else, a dialogue, even if we don't do much about it, but at least we become aware. And now I've become more and more involved with that, finding a way, a method of addressing it. You can't just say, and it's important to learn, to know the facts, but it is also important to get ready to fight it, not just, you shouldn't be doing it, slap on you. And that's a difficult thing today. These events are the reminders that don't allow us to forget where we are and what we should do. Education, by far, critical. But it's more than that. It's a commitment to how should I put it? A commitment to fighting for who we are, fighting for Judaism, not as a religion, but Judaism as a race, if you want, however you want to define it, to be accepted. And so here I am, and I take every opportunity to speak on the topic not of serious pogrom-like descriptions, but rather the most subtle, but equally dangerous events that are happening. So I'm here just, where is it? Never forget and learn how to deal with it. I could talk for another hour. My family life is rich, but my wife telegraphs me. Yeah, which I appreciate. So let me thank you again. And if you have any specific questions, by the way, I was 19 when I came to the States from Poland, so I have an interpretation of Poland that is more realistic than some of the knowledge that even historians have. Poland, just finishing statement, sweetie, don't get nervous. Poland, after getting rid of the Russians, after Stalin died in 1953, became more, in one part, more accepting of Jews and officially on paper less anti-Semitic. But the fact is that it didn't disappear. It just stepped back. And I don't know how to explain the fact that in 1968, the Polish government, and government was equivalent with the Polish Socialist Communist Party, declared the status of persona non grata for Jews, all Jews in Poland. Suddenly, Jews were losing jobs, were losing teaching positions, were losing any impact that they could have had. And they were told, we want to take back your citizenship. And they did. 40,000 Jews were forced to leave or live outside. To this day, there are dilemmas of how to deal with it, but the fact is that we cannot be fooled by the supposed elimination of anti-Semitism. It's deeper than that. And we need to look deep inside to be sure that we're addressing it. And we should never allow others to define who we are, because for that period, from the war till recently, we were told that we were Jews. We didn't, most of us, didn't say, hey, I am Jewish. No. They were told, you're a Jew. You deserve this and you cannot do that. We can't allow for that to happen. In any case, well, thank you. Did my wife tell you to do that? Anyway, thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be outside and I'll be... Oh, do it here. Sorry, I could be wrong, not often, but... And the reason I have my wife here, because I am very hard of hearing. So it is possible, even if you don't ask a question, I will misunderstand it.
All right.
Here I am.
So, who can I hand the microphone to staff? That's on.
All right. Yes. Ronnie. I think I read that you had become involved with the museum in Poland about Jewish history, and I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about why.
Who spreads these rumors about me?
I think it was on the internet. But I wondered if you could just talk about what you did and why.
What you did and why with regard to the Museum of the History of Polish Jews.
Oh, That was an interesting project, fascinating. I was getting to that actually. Thank you for that question. Poland believed that after it freed itself from the Russians, became ultra pro-Jewish, and as an example, they gave the Jewish schools. They didn't realize that those schools existed in the 50s and 40s. So they were claiming, look at our new government, freedom. We now allow Jews to have Jewish schools. And I would say, again, I already graduated, with honors too. And they said, what? We didn't know there were Jewish schools. So there's a lot of history that's not obvious. My involvement when the idea of the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, a millennium of it, came up, I was the first one to push for it. The museum was being built in Warsaw, of all places. I played the role of the guy who lived there, who would say, no, we had those schools. No, this didn't happen like that. Because there were a lot of myth conceptions. I spell it, purposely. The notion that Jews were now free to be, and it will never happen again, didn't fly. So there were pogroms after the war. The most famous one was in a city called Kielce. The local Polish population got angered at the Jews who came after the war and stayed in this community building while trying to find their brethren or the places that they owned before. And a story by a young boy who ran away from his house. Then when he came back, he told his parents that he was caught, kidnapped by the Jews, brought to the basement of this building that they own, and he saw Polish non-Jewish children being killed for the blood to make the matzah. Well, it wasn't disbelieved. Nobody said, are you crazy? Yeah. Nobody even said, what is he talking about? The building that the Jews occupy, doesn't have a basement. So what is he telling you? That wasn't necessary. Jewish survivors, and these were people who truly survived, were attacked by Polish soldiers, Russian soldiers, just people off the street. Major pogrom. So bad that half of the Jewish population, yes.
The question was related to the museum.
That's about the museum. Wait and you'll see. You see, train of thought. Okay, what was I talking about? Okay. So whenever I would talk about the need for the museum, getting back to you, somebody would say, oh, this is baloney. My knowledge is that the Holocaust denial, and more important, the attitude towards Poles and the Jewish, and that was a big to-do. The Jews outside of Poland were in a position to blame Poland for much of what they believe did not happen. So here would be somebody from the audience and say, I know that there was a pogrom a major pogrom, and I would say, where was it? And eventually we'd arrive at the town Kielce, and he would say, yes. And there were people killed, shot. And I would say, well, how many people participated? How many Jews were there involved in this? And he'd say, hundreds. And I said, would it be of any interest to you if I said that the actual number was in the high 40s, and at least one of them was not Jewish, he just looked it. You know what? Those stories about anti-Semitism grew, and they didn't just add to our knowledge base, they also added to the fact that others, non-Jews, could now claim we could have a pogrom. It's okay. We had them in the past. It was not hidden. The pogrom in Kielce was a major trial with all kinds of witnesses and things. It didn't matter. So I felt a tremendous need to participate in this. So I did. And I became a board member, eventually a treasurer. We raised millions of dollars. And the point to remember is that for the first time, the Polish government agreed to pay part of the expenses of building it. We Jews, or the Jewish community, were responsible for providing the artifacts, the knowledge base for all of that. So that's how I became involved. Any other questions? I guess the message is clear.
No. I am humbled to celebrate Holocaust Remembrance Day with you, and I'm sure the entire congregation is as well. But before we close.
Wait a second, is that true?
But before we close, I'm going to invite Jim Bogart and Anna up to do the memorial blessings. And I'd like for you to remain up here while they do that, okay?
Here I am. I was going to go down and sit down, but she told me not to. All yours. Thank you. Thank you.
El male rachamim, shochen bamromim, hamtze menucha nechona, tachat kanfei hashchina. B'ma'alot kedoshim uthorim, kezohar harakia mashirim. Et nishmot kol achenu b'nei Yisrael, anashim, nashim, v'tav, shenitbachu, v'shenechnaku, v'shenisrafu, v'shenehergu. Began Eden tehi menuchatam, ana ba'al harachamim, astirem beseter knafecha leolamim. Utzror bitzror hachayim et nishmotehem, Adonai hu nechalatam, v'yanuchu v'shalom al mishkavotehem, v'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the souls of all our brethren, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered and suffocated and burned to ashes. May their memory endure, inspiring truth and loyalty in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
The Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. Please rise and join me. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah, bi'alma divrach yirutei, bi'amlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon, u'b'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'gala u'bizman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam omei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmeid kudsha brechom. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechamata. Da'miran v'yama v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama Rabba min Shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. V'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. Amen. You may be seated. Thank you again for joining us tonight. I know that we've all been through a lot in this past bit. It's a hard topic. It's an important topic. And I think we all need just a minute. As you leave tonight through the lobby, you will see the Living On exhibit, which is on loan from the Tennessee Holocaust Commission. It features testimonies from residents of Tennessee who are survivors, liberators, and witnesses of the Holocaust, several of whom lived here in East Tennessee and will be familiar faces to some. Please read their stories, look at them in the eyes. There's also 4 copies of the book that you can see others. There's 100 panels altogether, something like that. These panels and about 12 others will be on exhibit at the Knoxville Jewish Alliance starting next week and through the middle of May. And you are welcome anytime to come visit and read their stories firsthand. Also, as you leave, there are yellow bags on the table with a memorial candle, or a yellow yahrzeit candle in there, and a letter with a prayer or meditation to read as you like, and the name of a child who no longer has anyone to say Kaddish for them, if you would mention their name as you liked, which are from the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs. Thank you again to Tennessee Holocaust Commission, to Knoxville Jewish Alliance, to our host tonight, Robin, and the Jewish Congregation of Oak Ridge. Special thanks to Allison for finding our most amazing speakers, Michael, and thank you, Bonnie. It's really been an honor. Thank you all. Have a good night.